William Wordsworth belongs to a milestone in the history of poetry. Wordsworth's idea of poetry that actually challenges the tradition of mimetic theory of art or representation theory, imitation theory that trickles down from Aristotle through Horace, Sidney, Dryden, Johnson. And there is a new theory that lays emphasis on emotive nature of art rather than mimetic nature. And that inspirational poetry or emotive poetry that causes a new trend in studying literature that is called expressive literature, expressive poetry, or expressive study of literature. Wordsworth primarily is not a critic. Everyone knows him as a poet. He himself declared in 1830 and said, I am not a critic, and set little value upon the art. The preface which I wrote long ago to my own poems, I was put upon to write by the urgent entreaties of a friend and healthy regret I ever had anything to do with it. Anyway, whether he has regret or not, Wordsworth preface to Lyrical Ballad is a highly significant event that makes an advocacy for expressive poetry, romantic poetry, personal subjective poetry. Wordsworth defined himself as a poet above all, and he is less prolific and gifted as a literary theorist and critic than his friend Coleridge. Wordsworth's early compositions and his creative partnership with Coleridge resulted in the anonymous publication of Lyrical Ballad in 1798. The volume opened with Coleridge, Ancient Mariner, and closed with Wordsworth, Tintern Abbey. So first poem is of Coleridge, last poem is of William Wordsworth. All but three of the intervening poems were Wordsworth's. A new edition of Lyrical Ballad incorporates Wordsworth's preface, and many new poems was issued in 1800. This edition gave Wordsworth name on the title page, but did not mention Coleridge's name. In preface, Wordsworth declared that the book's object was to choose incident and situations from common life and to relate or describe them in a selection of language really used by men, tracing in them the primary laws of our nature. In later decades, Wordsworth not only wrote new poems but also revised his earlier work. Wordsworth made the poet's own subjectivity the prevalent subject of poetry. Poet's own subjectivity, because in a new classical tradition, poetry was more or less objective in nature. That was concerned with objective human nature rather than the subjective feelings of the poet. Wordsworth spurred writers to break free from the authority of new classical rules and conventions of that age and to find inspiration instead in the emotions, experiences and speech of ordinary persons. ये सबसे बड़ा फर्क है कि जो क्लासिकल पोइट्स हैं वो आइडियाज में इंस्पिरेशन लेते हैं, वो क्लासिकल वर्क से इंस्पिरेशन लेते हैं, लेकिन जो वर्ड्सवर्थ और उसके फेलो पोइट्स हैं, दे गेट इंस्पिरेशन फ्रॉम ह्यूमन इमोशंस, ह्यूमन एक्सपीरियंस एंड ऑर्डिनरी पीपल्स स्पीच एंड कॉन्वर्सेशन. In valuing naturalness and spontaneity, Wordsworth was proposing not that poets abandon literary craft, but that poetry should begin with acts of self-expression and self-exploration. There is much truth in the familiar generalization that romantic poets are visionary, romantic poets are evocative, describers of nature. A describer of nature means romantic poets describe scene, setting, landscape. But the movement outward into the natural world is really one dimension of an interior journey, our quest into what Wordsworth called the hiding places of man's power. A number of formulations in the preface have become widely known and are permanently linked to Wordsworth's name. For example, modern poems, including lyrical ballads, fit to metrical arrangement, a selection of the real language of man in a state of vivid sensation. So, free verse we can say, which Wordsworth didn't try, but free verse has justification from this statement, this standard. Good poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. That is the definition of Wordsworthian poetry or Wordsworth poetry, taking its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. Wordsworth is less original than his bold tone and manner suggest. Much of what he says about figurative language, poetic diction, and relationship between poetry and prose draws on an array of 18th century English writings on emotion, knowledge, and aesthetic theory. So, modern critics points out the difference between Wordsworth poetry and his claims which he made in Preface to Lyrical Ballad. Actually, he seeks to explain and defend his own literary practice. In this respect, he is akin to fellow poets John Dryden and T.S. Eliot, who also defend their own type of poetry. In English, there is a strong tradition of poet critic, and Wordsworth is part of it.